Oh my, 2007 was such a bad year for Monday Night Raw. And the main reason, and I hate to keep harping on this, but the main reason for me personally was the John Cena title reign. He just held the belt forever. And I'm not saying that a long-term title reign can't work. We're seeing it now with Punk. I mean, CM Punk is basically the best part of the show right now. One of the reasons I stayed, kept watching in 2012 was like, well, I like what Punk's doing. But for me, Cena, and yes, I understand he's the poster boy. I understand he's the guy they want on top. I understand all those things. But the shows were just awful centered around him. And I've talked about how awful I think Cena's character is. It doesn't help when everything is so repetitive and everything just has this endless cycle to it. Here was your show for basically a year. Heel beats up Cena. Cena wins at the pay-per-view. Next month starts, rinse and repeat. That's your story. There is no story. There's no direction. It's just Cena is God, and fuck you if you don't like it. And that's basically, that's how I interpreted Raw in 2007. But other problems that they had were some of their other storylines. Vince killing himself, doing the whole thing where his car exploded. That was really funny, actually. I remember watching that and just laughing my ass off when I first saw it. I was like, wow, they're really going there. And, of course, it turned out to be one of the worst omens in wrestling because I think the next week Sherry Martel died. And then not long after that, we got the whole Benoit tragedy, and I don't think I need to repeat how bad that was. And, that tribute episode to Chris Benoit, I'm sure that's one that Vince McMahon would love to have back once all the details started coming out about what happened over that fateful weekend. That was a dark cloud that hung over them for a while. Was also the Benoit tragedy, and it affected Monday Night Raw in a big way. And then after that, they pretty much had to drop the whole McMahon. How does car blow up? Why is he dead? Is he dead? That whole storyline. Then they had to go with the illegitimate son angle, which was stupid to say the least, and had like one of the worst payoffs after all these weeks of build up. It's the Leprechaun. And, it's like, wow. So, number one, the storyline is stupid, but at least you're thinking, it's like, all right, whoever it is going to be made into a big star. Because the rumor was that it was going to be Kennedy, and, of course, had he not had a wellness violation and hadn't gotten hurt 18 times, he would have gotten that spot. But, instead, it's just a Leprechaun, and nothing good came of it at all. It was just another stupid idea that, was presented to us on television, but hey, what can you do? But overall, 2007 was just a maddening year for the WWE. And another thing about the Cena title reign that really sucked is that Cena got hurt at the end of the year, so he had to forfeit the title. So that long-ass Cena title reign that I said was directionless, it felt like there was no end in sight. The real benefit of having a long-term title reign is that you build up all this credibility. You build up, and if it's a heel especially, you build up all this heat. You build up all these things, and you just keep building and building and building and building. And then, theoretically, you transfer all of that over to somebody else when it's time to drop the belt. That's why Austin and Michaels at WrestleMania 14 worked so well, because Shawn had been champion, for a handful of months rather than just winning it 2 weeks before and getting, the match against Austin. He had been a long-term champion and had stayed practically unbeaten from the time he won the belt, and even before then, all the way until WrestleMania. So they got a lot out of that. Cena's title reign had no payoff. It was just he got hurt, and that was the end of it. So all that year long, it's like, some big heel's going to beat him, and he's going to be the biggest heel in the company or whatever. None of that happened. It was just a waste. The whole thing was just an exercise in aggravation and futility, because nothing came of it. It's just Cena was God, and then he wasn't one day because he got hurt, and that was the end of that. So, yeah, Raw in 2007, not a good year. 1995 was the year where the cartooniness of the WWF had really reached its apex, like where they had just pushed the kiddie crap to just the ultimate level, to the point where the show was just downright abominable. It was just terrible. I mean, lame-ass characters just polluted the show. We had an evil plumber, an evil dentist. The one that did it for me, and it was December 95, we got an evil Santa Claus, which I don't remember if he actually appeared on Raw, but it was just, I mean, all the shows basically suffered from the same problems, is that a lot of these characters were just lame. The overall tone of the show wasn't indicative of what you would want out of a wrestling product. And it was just a bad show. Now, maybe the formatting wasn't that bad, because if you go back and watch one of the old Raws in 1995, the formatting and the structuring is basically kind of more of what I would like now, where it's more of the formula for a wrestling show that I would want. Unfortunately, it was just littered with so many characters and so many stupid storylines that were going on that it just didn't matter. It was just lame-ass characters left and right. And, of course, you had Diesel as champion, which that didn't help. Not that I dislike Kevin Nash, but that title reign he had in 95 was one of the worst things ever. It was so bad. Oh, my God, it was so bad. But at least it was just the 1 year with Diesel, unlike the, it feels like 100 that we've had with John Cena, but it's neither here nor there. And the sad thing is, though, about 1995 WWF as a whole, is that WCW at the time, their big angle was the Dungeon of Doom. And I can tell you, as someone who lived through the Dungeon of Doom, that it was stupid, it was terrible, but at least it was funny bad. Meanwhile, at the Dungeon of Doom, and these stupid segments with all these, evil-looking cartoon characters talking about how much they hate Hulk Hogan and how much they want to kill him and everything. It was the dumbest thing imaginable, so much so that I was able to actually laugh at it. And, WWF wasn't even bad enough to laugh at. It was just bad. King Mabel winning King of the Ring. Why'd that happen? I don't know. Bam Bam Bigelow was a babyface. Yeah, that worked out real well. Probably, thinking about it, the only thing they really had that I can think of in 95 that was actually kind of cool was some of the stuff they did between Bam Bam and Lawrence Taylor leading into WrestleMania. I know their match wasn't that great, but some of the build-up to it was actually kind of cool. But, man, it's one of those things where I look back on 95 WWF and I'm thinking, man, if they didn't have Brett, they didn't have Shawn, they didn't have Undertaker, and they didn't have Razor Ramon, I don't know what they would have done, because they had nothing. It was unbelievable. They had nothing. Even Triple H, and Triple H made his debut this year. So did Steve Austin. Triple H comes in as this, American aristocrat gimmick that is not good. It was so cardboard cut out of so many other characters that had already been done that it just didn't fit. And the Ringmaster was Steve Austin's character when he first came in. And you're thinking, it's like, wow, Triple H and Steve Austin debuted this year. Ringmaster actually debuted on Raw, I remember that. And they were it was terrible. Like, their debuts were just like, really? These are your new guys? Wow. So it was dark times, but, some people defend it saying that's like, well, they were trying to be children's programming, and that they were, trying to make themselves comparable to Disney or Hanna-Barbera or Warner Brothers or anything like that. And I can respect that to a point. I'm not one of the people that says they need to move away from PG now, because I don't think you can still be PG and still be a good show. PG shouldn't be an excuse for stupid, and that kind of leads me into my next point. I was 9 and 10 years old in 1995, and I remember a lot of the children's programming that was going on at the time. The Batman animated series was still going. I believe X-Men was still going. Animaniacs was around. Pinky and the Brain was around. I don't think Freakazoid had come out yet. No, Freakazoid was a little later. Nickelodeon had some good shows like Rocker's Modern Life, and, their whole Nicktoon block, really. I'm trying to think if there was any other, because I had a lot of favorites. Disney was doing, I think they were still doing Darkwing Duck at that point, and Gargoyles had come out, and Gargoyles was really good. So I'm sitting there looking at this, and I'm like, well, yeah, they want to be children's programming, but the children's programming they're up against is vastly superior to what they're doing. And then if you look on the wrestling side of things, they're not, I mean, if you creatively can't beat the Dungeon of Doom, something is seriously wrong with you. And they couldn't. It was just terrible. And the fact that the Dungeon of Doom is arguably the better show is just sad. And ECW was just starting to get it. Of course, I wasn't watching ECW at the time, but it's just sad. It's like they weren't the best at anything they were trying to be. They were just shitty. Just flat out shitty. And, you know, I look back on 1995 with so much disdain because I'm like, man, you want to talk about a time where it was hard to be a wrestling fan? Try defending some of that went on. It was wonderful. Raw in 2009 was so fucking bad. I'm not even sure I have the words to appropriately describe how bad it was. 2 words: guest hosts. Vince decided that he wanted to make his show into a variety show, so we need to have a weekly guest host. Seth Green was on one episode, Jerry Springer, Bob Barker, John Lovitz, even a few wrestling personalities, Batista, Ted DiBiase, Dusty Rhodes, Jesse Ventura, and among others. And, you know, like I said about comparing them to children's programming in 1995, I could forgive it if you were actually good at it. If you were actually good at being a variety show, I could forgive it, but you're not. You suck at that. It was a shitty wrestling show, and it was a shitty variety show, so double fuck you. It was just a horrible, horrible show with no redeeming value. None. I mean, does anybody remember the Chavo and Hornswoggle feud that went on for like 6 months? Every week, it's like, all right, how's Chavo going to be humiliated this week? I mean, it's like, who cares? And none of it was funny. That's the thing. It's just, oh, God, it was so bad. And the main event programs weren't any good because it was just the endless cycle of Triple H, Randy Orton, and Cena, and I'd gotten bored of all of those pairings. And it didn't help that the top heels were Orton and Legacy. It was Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase. And they were just the biggest bunch of buffoons. I mean, they couldn't build heat on anybody. They could not sustain their heat for longer than a week. And if Raw by some miracle ended with them on top, you knew they were going to get embarrassed the next week. So it almost didn't matter. Ted and Cody in particular, I remember calling them Bebop and Rocksteady because they just got their asses kicked. They're just the buffoons that just get their asses kicked. And I'm like, you know, I remember when Evolution was a stable and they didn't look like that. So it's funny how when Triple H is the leader of the heel stable, they look like they're unstoppable. When Triple H is going against the heel stable, they look like a bunch of bitches. I don't know. It's just one of those funny things that I catch on to. And the guest host stuff was really bad. It just really unfunny, terrible backstage segments sometimes out there on live TV. The Jerry Springer one might have been the worst. The segment they did there. And I honest to God remember reading the reviews of Raw every week. And it was a weekly discussion of whether or not that was the worst episode of Raw. Every week. It was like, was that the worst episode of Raw? Was that the worst episode of Raw? And I felt like it was legitimate. It wasn't hyperbole. It really was that bad. Where every week was an honest-to-God, justified discussion of whether or not that was the worst episode in Raw history. So when people say like 2012 was really bad, and I'll admit it had a lot of flaws, I'm like, do you remember how bad 2009 was? And even 2010, which wasn't great, was like, it's not as bad as 2009. So it was just amazing how bad it got. Actually, before the guest host thing started, they did an episode where they ripped on the Denver Nuggets because there had been that whole controversy over WWE being kicked out of the venue to make room for the NBA playoffs. And Vince took his 2 hours of Raw to throw a hissy fit. And if you ever need evidence that Vince McMahon is petty and weird and childlike, go watch that episode, because that might be the worst episode in Raw history. Because that was like, wow, he really just took his whole 2-hour show to throw a temper tantrum. I'm like, wow, it's really bad. It's really bad. And of course, the main event of the show, this shows how bad it was. The main event of the show were 5 baby faces led by John Cena wearing LA Lakers jerseys against 5 heels wearing Denver Nuggets jerseys. And I'm just sitting there thinking, it's like, gee, do you really think the heels have any chance of winning this match? Do you honestly think that I believe that the heels are going to win this match? Because you've just spent the whole night crapping on the Denver Nuggets. And I'm like, do I really think that the guys who are for some reason wearing Denver Nuggets jerseys, again, makes no sense, aside Vince has an axe to grind, so he's got to do this. And of course the babyface is one. Who gives a shit? And of course Mr. Anderson, or Mr. Kennedy at the time, lost his job after the match, which was kind of weird. But yeah, Raw in 09 was just unforgivably bad. Unforgivably bad. I mean, I've said it was probably worse than WCW in its dying days, except for the fact that one of the celebrity guest hosts did not win the world title. That was the only thing they didn't do to make me think that the show was worse. And David Arquette was actually one of the guest hosts. So, yeah, remind us of that. So bring him back. That's a great idea. Which, David Arquette, celebrity, do those words really go together? I mean, really? Do they really? I mean, to me, he was always just, hey, he's the guy from Scream. Or Mr. Courtney Cox. That's what I know him as. And he's not even that anymore. But yeah, Raw in 09 was just really, really, really bad. And because they went into this variety show format, there really weren't any great long-running storylines. So it was really the only year I can think of where I was like, okay, what were the good things that happened? I'm sitting there and I'm like, I got nothing. I can't think of anything good that happened on Raw. And of course, it ended with Sheamus, a virtual unknown at that point, winning the WWE title, which I'm thinking is like, yeah, that would have been like if WCW put the belt on Mike Sanders. It's like, what the fuck is going on? It's just, oh my god. And then DX came back for the 80th time, and that run was horrible. It was just, again, bad comedy segments backstage every week while they were around it. It was just awful. I mean, I hope it never gets even half as bad as Raw was in 2009. It was one of the worst wrestling shows I've ever seen. Man, what a turnaround. And that's the phrase I would use to sum up 1997 for the WWF as a whole, in general. The first half of the year they were getting their asses kicked by WCW in the ratings, and they deserved to be, because their show was lacking direction. You look at what they were doing leading into WrestleMania 13, absolutely no direction. They didn't know what to do, where they were going, or what needed to happen next. And I believe there was that Raw that was taped in Germany and aired that did an insanely low rating. And, around the midpoint of the year, it felt like, wow, WWF really doesn't have much going for it. But they did have a couple things. One, they had Stone Cold Steve Austin, who they wisely decided to turn babyface in that great double turn between him and Bret. And Bret Hart was on this run as this anti-American heel. And that worked out really well for him and for the company as a whole, because it gave them a good villain. What happened after they hit their ultimate low, though? They turned the show around and obviously shifted towards the Attitude Era. And what they were in the first half of the year and what they were in the second half of the year, it's a completely different product. And, the Attitude Era was starting to go into full swing with things like DX coming about. Austin being showcased more and more and more as this rebellious spirit. The Undertaker getting more of an edge to him. And you already had a great character in Mankind, and he was getting showcased. Kane's debut happened, which Kane was, in those days, was one of the best characters they'd ever invested in. And it was all done in this more intense, more just, I guess, mean-spirited, more rebellious, more bombastic product. The Rock had really come into his own. He had just turned heel. And, you know, you look at this beginning in 1997, it's like, Rocky Maivia, this guy sucks. End of the year, The Rock is awesome. And as part of the Nation of Domination, it was just fantastic stuff. And it really gave him the platform he needed to shine. Ken Shamrock had come to the company. I felt he added a different element to things as well. So overall, you know, it was amazing to see how the company had just really turned itself around. And that was what impressed me most about 1997, that they could go sink to those type of lows and then bounce right back and basically completely change their image and just reinvent themselves with the Attitude Era. And then, obviously, the Montreal Screwjob happened at Survivor Series 97, so I have to bring that up. I mean, that led to the creation of the Vince McMahon character, the Mr. McMahon character that would ultimately be the lead bad guy of the Attitude Era, especially the next year in 1998. So they did a fantastic job of planting all the seeds they needed to eventually take back control of the Monday Night Wars and ultimately, you know, do away with WCW. But 1997, it really did. That was a year that showed, man, they really knew how to make adjustments and really knew how to change things and really make their product succeed in the best way possible. And for them to change with the times like that, I was just massively impressed. And their television shows got better, and it showed. And they carried it over for the next few years. What they were able to do in the latter half of 1997 really set the tone for the company until about, I would say, the end of the Attitude Era, which I place at WrestleMania 17. So kudos for your effort on that one. 2000 was the point of no return. I mean, this to me was like, look, WWF is in control and WCW is dead. That's just how I saw it. I mean, there was no question which one was the more exciting show, which one had direction, which one had more exciting and more interesting characters. And keep in mind, Undertaker was on the shelf for a good portion of the year. Foley retired at the early part of the year, and Austin was gone until October due to his neck surgery. And they were still vastly superior, which, you know, is sad to say that about WCW, but that's just where they were. And WWF was almost at a point where they could do no wrong. I mean, they could create, if somebody goes down, they could create a new star just like that. You know, the Radicals came over, and that gave them Benoit, Guerrero, Malenko, and Saturn, and obviously they got a lot out of Benoit and Guerrero. Benoit was main eventing pay-per-views by the summer, and had a great program for the Intercontinental title with Jericho, and that Jericho was another one that really came into his own in 2000. Kurt Angle was a brand new guy that they really showcased and really got him to the top pretty quickly and did a convincing job of it. And it was also, and again, this is best showcased in the video game WWF No Mercy. Look at the roster they had at the time that video game came out. It was unbelievable. And at all levels, even the low-card guys got over to some degree. It was one of those things where it's like, man, if you can't get over in the WWF in 2000, you must really, really suck, because they got everybody over, it felt. And every division was deep, except for maybe the women's division, but, you know, that is what it is. You had Triple H as the top heel, and this was, in my opinion, the best year of his career. No doubt about it. He was the top heel and ultimately deserved it. From his programs with Foley, with The Rock, with Jericho, with Kurt Angle. I mean, he was just on fire all year long. The Rock had really stepped into Austin's role as being the top babyface, and he was the man. He was fantastic. He was awesome. Undertaker reinvented himself as the American Badass to fit in with the new modern age, and he did. He stumbled a bit. I think he battled some injuries early on, but overall he was still able to get himself over. And you have all these guys getting over left and right, and this old guard that's really doing really well too. And it was just a very exciting time for wrestling. Now, and I think I've said this before, they started to stumble a little bit at the end of the year. This is where I started to see some dents in the armor, where I felt like they blew the Triple H, Stephanie, Kurt Angle love triangle. I felt like that angle got blown, and I felt like the angle with Steve Austin, who ran over Steve Austin. Not Rikishi being the reveal, I thought that was great, but where they went with it after that, I thought was kind of weak. But so I started to see little dents in the armor here and there towards the end of the year. But overall, I mean, WWF, I mean, they just kicked ass all year. 2000. And not only did they have good creative, they had the strong roster to back it up as well. So it was a very exciting time, and they produced some of their best television that year. So absolutely, 2000 WWF gets a thumbs up from me. Now, I want to make this point right off the bat when talking about 1998 WWF, because I'm going to use this to highlight the importance of creative and how important good writing is to a wrestling product. If you look at the rosters that WWF had in 1998, and then you look at the roster that WCW had in 1998, there's no contest. WCW's roster just kicks their ass. I mean, okay, they had Austin, Foley, Taker, Kane. Those were their top 4 guys. Then you had Rock, Shamrock, and DX as the next step down. Shawn was gone. Brett was gone. He'd gone over to WCW. Other than that, I mean, I don't want to say they had nothing, but their roster just didn't compare to WCW's. Especially they had Hogan, Savage. I mean, just look at the NWO alone and the guys that were in that group, the Cruiserweight division. They had just gotten Bret Hart. So, on paper, WCW should have been destroying them. That was not the case. And what was it about the WWF's product that made them better than WCW's in 1998? And what it comes down to more than anything else is the writing. They had their big star in Steve Austin, and they put him in an angle where he feuded with the boss. He rebelled against authority. The angle, Austin versus McMahon. And that storyline, even though the whole evil boss thing has been overdone to death nowadays to the point that I'm just sick and tired of it, that gave them such a direction and such fresh material to work with, and made so many other characters along the way, because, Foley and Taker and Rock and DX all got mixed into it one way or another. So many characters got made because of that angle. That it worked. And it made the television exciting from week to week to week, to where it's like, all right, okay, Vince did something this week, so I have to see how Austin's going to respond this week. Or, Austin did something crazy here. How's McMahon going to respond? And how's he going to try and get the title off of Austin this week? It was just this constant back and forth, and it was just brilliant from week to week to week. And I already said that October show after, or the September show after Breakdown, that pay-per-view, the night after Breakdown, is my favorite episode of Raw of all time, because that was basically like the height of the intensity of Austin McMahon in my eyes. And it also helped that it was the Attitude Era. They were being a little bit more risque with a lot of the things they were doing. And that led to a lot more interesting experimentation. They brought in Gangrel, who was a blood-drinking vampire. A little bit intense. You couldn't have gotten away with it a few years ago, or a few years prior to this. But they tried it here, and I thought Gangrel was a cool character. I think he could have been the WWE's equivalent to Raven, and he never got pushed to that level, unfortunately. But, it was something different. Val Venus never could have done that before the Attitude Era. It was a great character, and it was just to listen to his double entendres when he would talk. That stuff was great. Edge came on, and Edge was kind of, initially was kind of the spooky, outsider type of character that fit in with the current flavor of what the company was going for. And they were starting to put the pieces into place. They were starting to build up their roster to eventually get to that point in 2000 where they had the deepest roster in wrestling. But for now, they really just had to rely on the strength of the Steve Austin character and the strength of a handful of other characters, and good writing to pull it all together. And the writing really, you know, and I don't know who to entirely credit with that. I guess you could give it to McMahon. I guess you have to give some of it to Russo. But the creative that year was just unparalleled and just producing exciting television just week after week after week. And what really helped, I think, and this is something that we don't have today, and wouldn't even have a year later when SmackDown came about, I liked it better when you had to wait from Monday to Monday. That to me was more exciting. That's like, oh my god, Raw ended like this, and I gotta wait until next week to see it. Oh my god, that's just crazy. I felt Nitro was better before Thunder showed up. I felt, and even in '98 they introduced Sunday Night Heat, but you still had to wait 6 days just for a teaser for Monday Night Raw. So it's still, even then, it still kind of worked. But I liked it better when there was nothing in between Raws, except for, you know, you'd have like your throwaway Saturday morning show or something like that where nothing really happened. It's just a magazine show. But you know, I thought that was better, and I thought SmackDown kind of polluted the water there a little bit. I felt Thunder did as well. I mean, yeah, how much programming does the WWE have now? Almost as much as WCW did back when it became crazy how much programming they had. But I did really like that you had to wait from Monday to Monday, and I think that made it even more exciting and made the shows fresher. I felt like, you know, it felt like every week they were coming up with something, and not that every idea was a hit. I mean, the Brawl for All happened this year, so it wasn't that everything they were doing was perfect, but they did take a lot of risks. The show was very exciting, and every week it was must-see television. I was like, all right, I got to see how they're going to resolve this and where they're going with that, and how's this going to play out? How's this character going to react to this? And it felt like they'd finally found their identity and their direction, and it really benefited the WWE for years that followed. And it was great. I think it's some of the best television that the WWF has ever produced, and some of the best wrestling television I've ever seen.